Malta has the highest rate of domestic violence reporting in the EU.
Why do you have broken fingers? What happened to your face? I don't remember doing this to you.
You're bonded with a trauma. It's not love.
Any form of physical violence is absolutely not acceptable. I mean, there's no line there.
I said, if a man ever hit me, I would walk out. How dare they? But when my ex punched me in the face, I didn't leave. Welcome to the She Word, conversations that women rarely have but really should. Now, this is the second of our show in this season on gender-based and domestic violence. In fact, in that recent show with Sephora, Rachel and Elaine, we reached over 200,000 plays on Instagram alone, and over 100,000 views on our other social media platforms. The show itself was watched and listened to over 20,000 times. We know that the truth is that over last year there were more than 2,000 cases of domestic violence reported here in this country, in Malta. Over 20% of cases reported since 2020. This is an incredibly important topic that we need to just keep talking about over and over again until we fulfill our goal, which is to eliminate domestic or gender-based violence. Until then, we're going to keep having these shows about this topic. In Malta in 2022, 3,100 individuals made use of the different services available to those experiencing domestic violence here in Malta. And here in Malta, it's estimated that between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 women are affected by domestic, gender, and intimate partner violence. That means if it's not you, it's someone close to you. It's someone that you know. A recent Eurostat survey on public perceptions on gender-based violence states that, amongst other things, a third of Maltese people believe that women often make up or exaggerate abuse or rape claims. The same report revealed Malta has the highest rate of domestic violence reporting in the EU, a double-edged sword, which we'll talk about later. Data showed that nearly 1/3 of women in the EU have experienced violence at home or at their workplace or in public. However, only 1 in 4 of those women report violent incidents to the authorities. This situation relating to domestic, intimate partner or gender-based violence is completely unacceptable. Yes, even here in Malta. So in this show, the second on this topic, we're going to share lived experience on how women and men find themselves subject to gender-based or domestic violence and what we can do about it, each one of us can do about it to make change. So I really want to thank my brave and courageous guests for being here at the table with me. It's amazing to have you here. I'm going to start with you, Samantha Parch-Gazan, because this is not the first time you've sat with me.
Yeah, actually, this is the second time. I think the first time it was about diversity, right?
It absolutely was.
And it was a very interesting conversation. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to let you fill in the details about who you are in just a second. But just to set things, the ball rolling, Samantha is the Domestic Violence Commissioner. And Samantha, you've been an activist since you were a young woman. You've got a passion to deal with the critical challenge that we have an issue with relating to domestic violence. And I'm so thrilled that you're here. You've been appealing for electronic tagging of DV offenders, further resources, dealing with the backlog of domestic violence cases, and looking into the patriarchal culture that's both harmful to men and women. You've not held back about speaking out your mind on all of these cases, but also you're leading change and we're seeing change. So I'm going to come to you in just a second, Samantha. Sam, I'm so glad that you're here at this table today. Oh, Beatrice Njoya, also known as Queen Bee, I am so thrilled to have you at the table. Now, You are known to most as this year's Malta entry to Miss Universe. You're wearing the sash with you, and you look beautiful. You're a stunningly beautiful woman who's enjoyed a very successful career as a model. You are 40?
Yes.
My goodness, you look amazing. You look absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
But
Thank you
you're
very
also
much.
a mum of 3.
Totally.
Originally from Cameroon.
Yes.
You are also a domestic, sexual and emotional abuse survivor, and you're bringing your lived experience to the table. And I'm just goosebumpy even. I'm going to be choked up right the way through this show. But I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm going to get you to fill in some details in just a second. Dr. Georgina Portelli, hello.
Hi.
So you are a specialist in concept formation, language representation and multilingualism, holding a PhD from the University of London. Your work has focused on diaspora and memory studies, culture for social inclusion, and you're passionate about addressing the gender-based challenges that we as women face today.
Yeah,
Now,
more or less.
all of that sounds particularly fancy, so I'm going to stick with you and ask you just to fill in a little bit more about you and also why you're at the table here with us today.
I do a lot of things.
Yes.
So I have many interests. So as you well said, I'm interested in how we form concepts. I'm also interested in very much so in how we use language. Language itself can be it's what conveys both our thoughts and our actions. And it can be a tool as well as a weapon. So, there's more than one way of looking at that. I'm also interested in art. I've worked, for a number of years in the cultural sector. So that's a bit more about myself.
Okay.
Of course, I'm interested in gender-based violence. I'm interested in patriarchy, very much so. And of course, I have my own experiences in terms of relatives who had to undergo gender-based violence and also domestic violence. So yes, that's why I said yes to your show.
Brilliant. Well, you said 2 things there that really stuck with me. First of all, we will be talking during the course of the show of how to look out for friends and relatives who we think are going through gender-based violence, domestic abuse and domestic violence, and how we can help them. Because we want to empower everybody. Everybody has a role to play in this issue, which is just unacceptable. But you also said something about language, and I caught myself recently referring to something in quite we were talking about, it was all relating to sex and something quite pleasurable, and I used a derogatory term. And I caught myself as I said it, and I thought to myself, no, that is not the analogy. That is a negative alignment with what I'm trying to say. And I think that applies to this topic as well. The use of language that we use and how we refer to women and men in these situations. I like you a lot. I'm going to ask Samantha, before I come to you, Beatrice, I'm going to ask Sam, you've been at this table before. We just mentioned that. I'm so glad that you're here again. You're actually in a different role than you were last time.
Yes. I was the commissioner for the rights of persons with disability then.
That's right.
Yeah, now I'm doing another very important and intense job. Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that job and then why you're at the table and your passion and we're going to talk about lived experience as well, because I think that's very relevant.
Well, my job as the commissioner, I'm the head of the Commission on Gender-Based Violence, and our role is to implement the Istanbul Convention, which is the convention of the Council of Europe that focuses on prevention and combating violence against women and girls.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you just for a second because there's a lot of fancy titles there.
Yeah.
Talking about it in real basic terms.
Yeah. I was coming to that.
Okay, brilliant, because I was confused.
Because I do understand, it's fancy words. In practice, it sets the standards of what is acceptable and what is not, and what countries should be doing to prevent gender-based violence, but also to protect victims and provide support services, and also in terms of prosecution. So that is holding people accountable basically for their actions. It's not okay to just say, yes, he or she did that, but people should be held accountable for their behaviors.
That is a big job.
It is, and I love it.
Wow. Well, can I ask you then, what is the point of passion for you? Because it is a big job. You've just listed a whole bunch of responsibilities that fall within this commission.
Yeah.
And great. And I'm really glad that we have this. And I'm glad that you said something just then. You said we are defining what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. But why this? I mean, this is not an easy job. Why would you choose this?
Well, I never was brought up to take easy on. So I don't know, it's a nature-nurture issue. So if I was brought up that way or it's my character, but I love a challenge. But more importantly, it's not just a challenge. I am passionate. I started my activism in this sector from, I think, when I was around 15 years old or 16 years old. Before that, I was already passionate about gender equality in general. But then I started getting involved as well in a Stop the Violence project from the Malta Girl Guides. Actually, it's an international project from the
Girl Guides.
Yes.
Wow. So this is a long time ago. Right. Okay.
Yes. And I think from there, I just realized that I can do things. And I do have the power, maybe not to change the world, but to do something and change what I can, And that's where my activism started, basically. I mean, gender-based violence is all around us, So the reason why I chose to be active in this field specifically is because of personal experiences and, realizing that it's taken lightly in so many ways as well.
Now, you mentioned about gender-based violence, and I want to make it very, very clear that we are sitting at the table. We're not suggesting that men don't also experience gender-based violence or domestic violence or probably intimate partner violence. We're not suggesting that for a second. But because this is the she word, we're addressing women within this, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So I'm pretty sure within your commission that there are situations where you deal with men who are having to go through these absolutely abhorrent circumstances. But for the focus of the show, we're looking at women.
Yes, I mean, statistically, it's women who are mostly victims. Again, we never do say that men are not victims of gender-based violence or domestic violence. When we talk about the patriarchy as well, patriarchy definitely affects men a lot. And I do believe that even us as a commission, we need to be talking more about that as well. But in terms of gender-based violence, so when we're talking about gender-based violence, we're talking about violence that happens to someone, that someone does on someone because of their gender. And it's usually because they're part of a minority, a gender minority, or because they're women, mostly.
We're going to come back to that in just a second because I want to be clear when we're sitting at the table defining, because we're using lots of different terms. And we're also going to talk about the difference, which we have done before in the previous show. We've talked about the differences between gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. We'll come to that in a second. But before we do that, and I'm so glad that you're here, Sam, but before we do that, I have to come to Beatrice. Hello there.
Hello, Trudy.
I'm so glad that you're at this table. This is the first time I've met you, and I already feel like I've known you for a long time.
Yes, me too.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You went and represented us in the Miss Universe so beautifully, and thank you for doing that. But tell us a little bit about yourself, because you, like me, don't originate from Malta, but we've made this our home.
Exactly. We made this our home. So basically, I came in Malta 7 years ago, or 8 now, I stopped counting. And I came with my ex-partner, my ex-husband, and our children, because he found a job here. Unfortunately, We couldn't make it anymore with our marriage, and I asked for divorce here. At first, I used to move from Malta, between Malta and Paris, because I mean it was a big change for me. I'm a city girl, big city girl. I'm a model, and I had my personal business in Ivory Coast in Africa. So it was a big change, a big shock. The language barrier. Also the fact that I knew no one, so I just landed in the middle of nowhere. My kids, they were too young, so I said, okay, I need to adapt step by step. So I was moving 2 weeks in Paris, 2 weeks in Malta. When he's abroad, I'm here with children. And after 6 months, I said, okay, now it's time to settle down and fix my life and handle my family. So, yeah. That's how I decided to settle in Malta. And also I had my divorce ongoing because I asked for divorce, and all the courts, the procedures and everything requires me to be 100% in Malta. And I was about to lose my children because obviously I wasn't mentally stable, going through the trauma of abuses, mental abuses, physical abuses, being bullied, and the fact that I was just feeling like rejected in the society. I had no job. I had zero money because I was also tricked regarding our finances. I thought I had due to our marriage, but I ended up knowing that I had nothing. So it was tough.
Well,
Yeah. It was I had a hard time, the hardest ones of my life. But I'm sitting here today.
you know, it's a beautiful opportunity to share.
Yes.
And we'll do this on the table, but to share how hard life can be, and then to see how much you can overcome that.
Totally.
Because I'm pretty sure that when you were going through that, you could not have imagined that one day you would be representing Malta on stage at Miss Universe. I'm going to cry. I'm sorry. I'm just.
We're going to cry.
We're going to cry. But isn't that true? I mean, we sat here. You've echoed so many things that our guest said before. You talked about financial, and we refer to everything under this umbrella as violence. But there's other things that we don't consider. There's not just the hitting someone or the physical violence. You mentioned sexual, you mentioned emotional, you mentioned the financial. This is, for anybody who's listening to this, and we're going to talk about this in more depth in a second, but this, we have these preconceptions of what gender-based or domestic violence is.
Yes.
And in actual fact, it's far more. It's the torture, it's the emotional angst of being told you'll never make it, you'll be fine. You won't survive without me.
Yeah.
You think you're going to be okay, but you're not going to make it.
Exactly.
You won't be able to make it.
That was my issue, because I was told for more than 10 years that I'm not worth it. Nobody would ever want me. After having 3 babies, my body changed. So who would like you with this type of body? Your stretch marks, you don't have the breast of a young lady anymore. You are jobless, you don't have money. Who you think would accept you? So in my head, I was just like, okay, fine, it's the end of my life, so I have to submit myself and just accept whatever comes and cry till the end. Yeah.
Can I ask you something? We kind of come to the end of the show in 5 seconds. But because you've come in with such this incredibly tragic story, but also such an incredibly positive story, because we know what you were doing just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And so when you stood on that stage, representing Malta, having fought against everything and won, you must have had a moment where you just thought to yourself, you know what, you were so wrong, look at me now.
Yeah. It started here in Malta, actually. When I never believed that I would make it, to be honest. And this, I said it all the time. I mean, Miss Universe for me was just like, okay, fine, let me do another thing different from modeling, And I never believed for a second, although my children, they were a huge support. My partner kept telling me, like, knowing you, I'm pretty sure you would make it. I'm like, come on, you're joking. I would never make it. I mean, like, what do you think? I'm 40 years old. Look at them, how pretty they are, young, and they have everything where it should be. And I'm just like, okay,
I love the way you put that.
I'm trying my best to hold everything together, And they're so young and full of life. And I'm here sitting with all my traumas and everything. I'm not going to make it. And then I stand on that 11th of July, the numbers, the countdown started, top 16. I'm part of the top 16, top 8, top 5, top 3. And I said, okay, I would have the second place. And I'm standing there with my first runner-up. Till then, I'm like, no, I'm the first runner-up. She's the winner. And when they called me St. Paul's Bay, I couldn't believe it. I mean, that moment, those 5 minutes, I can't tell you exactly what ran through my mind. I realized when I went back to the hotel and it was time I slept at about 5 a.m., just trying to realize that I did it, I make it. And then I had a flashback about my life from the beginning. I remembered all the challenges I had starting from when I was 19. When I had my first girl, I was 19 years old when I had my baby girl. And things just changed from there. Every single step, I started analyzing the life of that young lady who just asked to be happy and to make her life make sense. And I looked at her and I said, wow, you're strong and I'm so proud of you. Look at you now. They said you would never manage to do it. You went through all this. It was just a path, a way to lead you where you're standing today. You should be proud of yourself. You're stronger than you think.
And this is why I love having lived experience on this show, because we don't get the opportunity to go back to our younger selves and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. But we do get the opportunity to say to other women, we're proof it's going to be okay.
It's possible.
It's more than okay. It's going to be brilliant if you have the right support, if you have the right attitude. You're going to be far more than you could ever have imagined. I'm so glad you're here. Listen, we're going to come to more of your stories in just a minute, but before we do that, I want to ask these ladies, can you define for me, we've used several terms already. Can we define, once again, we've done it before, but I really want to be clear about this. We've talked about gender-based violence, we've talked about domestic violence, and we've often talked about intimate partner violence. But I want to talk about the differences. What does that mean? And what areas do they touch on? Because we've just talked about financial, emotional, sexual, control, abuse, so on and so forth. So can we just throw on the table, what is it that we're talking about in this show?
Okay, so I spoke briefly about gender-based violence. So it's violence on another person because of their gender. It's usually not intentional is the wrong word. You wouldn't be thinking that I'm going to hurt her because she's a woman, or I'm going to hurt him because he's a man. But because of how we're brought up, of the stereotypes, how the social norms that we're brought up in affect how we think of someone. And based on gender, we have those perceptions. So that's gender-based violence. You've mentioned forms of different forms of gender-based violence. There's also FGM, which is female genital mutilation, child marriages or forced marriages, forced sterilization, and they affect different social groups as well. The different forms of violence affect different social groups as well. Domestic violence is then violence which happens in the domestic sphere. So it happens within the family, within the intimate partner relationship as well. So intimate partner violence is a form of domestic violence. But domestic violence is not limited to intimate partner violence. It can also be child to parent, parent to child, and anyone in that dynamic, the family dynamic. So that's the difference, and it's also how it's defined in our legislation, basically. I don't know if Georgina wants to add anything.
No,
to
I think
that.
you've more or less
So,
summed it up.
I mean, you nodded because when Sam was talking about cultural kind of perceptions, it comes back to what you said before. It's the language. You can learn so much from someone by the language that they use.
But it's also about acculturation, how we are brought up. From a very early, from very early on, we give children, we give the different genders very different roles. The expectation in society of what a girl should be doing and what a boy needs to do. We send, we're expecting boys to be highly independent, etc., have this expectation. Whereas with girls, not we, but in terms of society, it tends to, impart these stereotypes. So this expectation that girls have to be caring, they have to, they play with dolls, they.
Not all of us. I played with the action man.
No, absolutely. I took my doll apart very early.
Me too. I took them all. I had a Cindy. When I was growing up, there was Cindy's and Barbies. I cut all the hair off my Cindy, so she had a crew cut. She looked really cool.
Well, I did play with dolls, but honestly, I still don't fit the stereotype of being the caring, domesticated woman. So,
but under that,
there's nothing wrong with playing with dolls. Let me put it this way as well. So we need to,
of course,
whoever plays with dolls, whether it's a boy, whether it's a girl, whether it's whoever. It's just that it's whether there's this transmitted pattern in terms of what you should be doing when you grow up, the expectation.
And that comes into play when we're trying to eliminate the perceptions that relating to domestic violence or gender-based violence of men on women, because that is so ingrained in global culture, not just here in Malta. So I just want to go a little bit further into that and poke that a little bit more. When we're talking about domestic violence or gender-based violence, we often think of the word violence as someone hitting someone.
Yep.
But that tends to be the catalyst of everything that goes before. So that's not necessary. We've discussed this before, but you don't go out for dinner, sit down on a first date, and if he whacks you one around the head, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to get up and go, because that doesn't happen on a first date. So what is it that makes up the violence aspect of this? What are we seeing? What are the elements?
Occasionally, even on a first date, someone can hit you on a first date if that's the culture that they're brought up in. But speaking of first dates, I would definitely include sexual assault and emotional manipulation on early stages of dating, because whenever you do not give consent to sex, then it's abuse. And there could be so many situations where one imposes themselves on that person. The person might still the victim might be in a situation where she's not comfortable in saying that she's uncomfortable. And the message is not communicated with words. So in that sense, there is no consent, but the person is not saying it, So that would still be sexual assault. And that's something that could easily happen on the first date. There's that, but there's also the manipulation, the first red flags, when someone is already imposing certain things or communicating certain elements that could be highlighted immediately as red flags. So their ideas, their perceptions, simply deciding exactly on what to do and what not to do, or implying that a second date is definitely going to happen, or, these kind of tactics and manipulation. So what Beatrice was saying about the manipulation mostly is that even when the violence is more physical, generally there's always the emotional and the psychological violence that is manipulation, and that is there to control that person in so many different ways. It can be non-verbal, verbal, in so many ways, online as well, certain expectations online as well.
We haven't even touched on online yet, because that's a whole other thing. But I think that's part of parcel of most women's experiences. Coming to you, Beatrice, can you list through everything that you experienced in your situation that was not acceptable? So you mentioned physical violence, but you also mentioned financial and so on. I'm going to leave that down to you.
Yes, the list is quite long, to be honest.
We have time. We have time. But I think it's worth...
Yes, it's worth talking about it. Like I was telling you previously, I mean, I feel more comfortable now talking about it. And I think feeling more comfortable to talk about what are taboos for us is the first step toward healing. So now I don't have any taboo. No matter the subject, I'm like ready to talk about it. I'm not afraid of the judgment of the society anymore, because this contributed highly into my trauma, into my trauma. So I don't want it to be part of my life anymore. So basically, about my personal experience, I would start with the red flags, just to join your first question. The red flags in my situation, it could be anything. I mean, I started dating at a very young age, my ex, and the red flags, they were there. But, when you're in the state of mind of, I'm young, I don't expect anything out of this relationship. So you are kind of unconsciously closing your eyes to things that you could have seen if you took it more seriously. So the behavior of the person when, for example, he's having a glass of wine, how he behaves when he's tipsy versus how he behaves when he's sober. Is he aggressive with his surrounding? His wording change or remain the same? Is he still respectful or he behave on a certain way? For me, it was there from day one. From the first day, all those red flags were there. But I was like, you know what? We are young. I'm not expecting marriage or children, so let me just have fun. That was the first mistake, and the mistake that cost me everything. So it started from a slap, a simple slap after a few nights out drinking, came back home offended because I asked, where were you? I received the first slap. I called his mom, complained and everything, because even my dad never ever raised his hands on me. But my mom, she used to... My mom, she was very quick. Like, yes, she used to send it very fast. And that's also, it's a kind of domestic violence that you just mentioned previously.
Absolutely.
But in the society where I grew up, for us, correcting physically our children is a kind of norm, which is not. And I think this society need a re-education on it, because it's not normal at all. They don't have any idea of the trauma that they create in the life of their children, and how those children will perpetrate those trauma on their children, on their partners in the future. So apart from that, so it starts from the first slap, and then when he gets sober, he apologized. He doesn't even remember slapping me. And I accepted second mistake, and it went from a slap to two, and from two to a huge one on the face, like a potato, we call it in French. I ended up with a black eye, hiding to my family, lying to my family, telling them, no, I got into a car accident. I had this, I slept in the living room, I hit my head, always having things going on. And from then, I ended up being abused by someone which he brought home. And while he's physically assaulting me, that person pretended to try to, to separate and everything. And he was physically abusing me, like touching me and everything, So at that moment, I just feel like I'm touching the bottom, I'm just not a human anymore. I'm worthless. I mean, it was so degrading. So from there, it continued physical abuses, sexual abuses, I was assaulted by men, by 5 men. They drugged me and they abused me physically with the complicity of someone that I trusted, my best friend, who took me there. And she just left at some point, and I don't remember what happened. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, and then being told on a daily basis, because I reached a point where I knew, I was conscious that this is not good, this is not right. I have my baby girl growing up with me. She's witnessing all the abuses. Sometimes she's screaming, she's crying, she's asking, don't do this, don't hurt my mom, don't do this. Don't do that. So she's already mentally affected. Do I want her to continue? However, I still have faith, because in the moment of sobriety, I have all the promises. First of all, I don't remember what happened. It's blackout, never remember what happened. I don't remember assaulting you. What happened to your eyes? Why do you have broken fingers? What happened to your face? I don't remember doing this to you. Are you sure? So I started even doubting myself, like maybe I'm just a kind of, sleeping, walking, I don't know, and doing things without remembering. And I'm sorry, I promise you everything would be fine. I kept on believing and believing until the children came in, and it just got worse. And the last episode was here in Malta, when I nearly lost my ability to walk. My spine dislocated. And this is when I said, okay, now it's now or never. Because I think the next one would either put me 6 meters on the ground or stuck in my bed forever, and my children will suffer. So I have to stop this. So, there are so many different type of abuses. In my case, for example, I have experienced them all. I don't even know how I managed to stay strong inside here. And I'm just realizing the ability of human to be strong in their mind when they want. I don't know how. I cannot tell you how. I'm not a scientist, but I know that our brain is a so powerful tool that we can use to save our life. When we reach the survive, when we activate the surviving mode, our brain will cooperate with us. And this is my case.
Can I ask you something? First of all, I am so unbelievably sorry that for any woman that has experienced that. But I know from what you said before as well that there was financial control. We're going to explore in a second, again, moving into that, because what I want to do, and the reason I'm pushing this, is because I want to make sure that every woman who's listening to this show, who's going through an experience, feels seen.
Yes.
And knows that they might not be hit, but that kind of but emotional manipulation is still abuse. And that's still not acceptable. And we're going to head down that road in just a second. Before we get there, I've said this before, but I can remember saying to myself when I was a young girl, when I was a teenager with a feisty, independent spirit, I said, if a man ever hit me, I would walk out. How dare they? But when my ex punched me in the face, I didn't leave. And he came back with the apology. I'm so sorry. I lost my temper. And then afterwards, he came back and said, after that, he said, well, you should really watch how you wind me up, how you aggravate me. Because, I'm sorry I did it, but you're responsible for this as well. And then when I was dragged up a gravel drive by my hair on my back and scratched and tore my back up, I still didn't walk away. And I know why I didn't walk away. I was separated from my family and my support. I was thousands of miles away from my family and my support. I was isolated. I didn't know people. I didn't have the financial independence. I was earning a lot of money, but I didn't have the financial independence that I needed. And on top of that, you're in a situation where you believe that the person who's telling you that they love you loves you. And in my case, there was certain circumstances in my childhood whereby that behavior was present. And so you don't have the equipment to be able to say, actually, that's not love. That's diametrically opposed to love. Before we come to these ladies, you mentioned, Beatrice, that you had a moment where you said to yourself, okay, I'm not going to survive if I don't leave.
Yes.
But can you look back now and say why you didn't leave before? Because I think
Yes.
it's important for not just for people that are going through it to understand why they don't necessarily leave,
Yeah.
but family members need to understand why that person doesn't necessarily leave. Why didn't you leave before?
So I didn't leave. I have 3 reasons. First of all, my relationship, my dad was against this relationship because, I mean, he's my dad. He saw the red flags and he said, I'm pretty sure that this person is not good for you. But I just wanted at that age to get out of the house and fly with my own wings. So I told my dad I was running away from my home from time to time. I just escape because my parents doesn't want me to do whatever I want. I will escape for 2 days and come back, just like to kind of punish them. And at some point, my dad told me, listen, it's your decision. You already have a baby, so you're grown up enough, although you're only 19. It's your decision. You do whatever you want. But the day you find yourself in trouble, don't come to me and tell me, I told you. Those were my dad's words. And I said, okay, fine. I moved in with him and the problem started. So the more it was getting worse, I was so ashamed to go back to my parents and tell them. Although they used to see, I mean, they are my parents, they made me, they know. And they know how I am as a person, that I'm oversharing. But for some reason, I was very discreet about my relationship. And my mom was seeing things on my body, marks and everything. So I was so ashamed to go back to my parents, first of all. And the second thing is that, like you just mentioned, the person telling you on a daily basis how much he loves you, how much he wants to build with you, how much you're the woman of his life, he will never imagine himself with another woman, doing these kind of things to you, you want to give him a chance. Every single day you build on hope, basically, for a better day, hope that will never come. And the third thing is that money. He's holding you with money. Never want me to work. I went to school, I study and everything, but he never wanted me to work. Always told me, listen, I work, I have enough money. You take care of yourself, of your daughter, before my 2 others, and that's it. So I found myself, when I got my kids, when we got married, I had the little ones, without money, nothing. I built for myself. I mean, where do you want me to go? I can't go back to my parents. I have 3 children already. They don't really know what is going on. And I feel so responsible for my children that I just have to make it work. I have to make it work. And at some point, I also start feeling a kind of responsibility toward this person, because I'm seeing that this person is under he's having also problem, alcoholism. And the fact that he's assaulting me physically means that he has a problem. There's something not right with him. I want to help him. I can't just leave him there. I want to help him. I want to be there for him. He has only me. I start convincing myself and building myself stories of a psychologist or psychiatry for him. So I decided to wear this cape of superhero in his life, and I forgot about my own self and my well-being and behavior. So it was everything around him. And at any point, I thought of my own well-being. I was suffering and everything. And I said, no, I have to do it. I can't let him. I can't leave him. He have only me, the children. What will happen? It was only about him. I stayed until that day when this happened. For 5 minutes, I couldn't walk. I was sitting there. I couldn't move my legs, crying. And I said, okay, look at you. And my children, they were there. They were all crying. And I said, no, it was the moment where I had this click.
There's this extraordinary thing. I mean, you mentioned something there that Sephora, when she was on the show, she said she was almost addicted to the apology.
Yes.
Because she had once seen I mean, you mentioned about first dates, but largely speaking, there might be red flags present, but there usually isn't violence on a first date or so on and so forth. Because most people would sit there and say, oh, okay, this is really not cool. But that whole episode of becoming involved, you believe in that person, you love that person, you think that that person is the person, you invest in that person. And so when they turn around and they are violent in whichever way, shape or form that takes itself on, when they come back and they say, listen, I love you, I'm sorry, you live for that moment. That is the moment. The love bomb after the abuse. And suddenly everything for that moment is perfect. And that's exactly what you said, and that echoes what Sephora was saying, is that makeup moment, she was addicted to that makeup moment.
Yes.
Because it justified everything else in her mind. But the ladies that sat at this table before, and we were talking about this before we came on the show, Sam, there's one thing in common, and it was a wake-up moment when they saw their children at risk. And I think you've mentioned before, Sam, that generally is a catalyst for women, is that they suddenly feel that somebody else is at risk.
I mean, before we were talking about this as well, so the playing with the dolls, and women learning to be caring beings. And in these situations, when someone has manipulated you and told you that you're not worth living, you're not worth, nobody will love you again, but you have your kids. You have your kids, and you love them more than anything in the world. And usually the children are witnesses and they are victims of domestic violence in that situation as well. But usually they can be used to manipulate the victim. But the idea of even the kids not loving you is not maybe used that much. So it's not that ingrained in your head. So when you realize, and sometimes it might be too late already because the children have already suffered the trauma as well. But when you realize this is bad for them, I think it's not easy, and it's not just that, because the financial issues, the trauma bonding between you and your perpetrator, it's a very, very complex dynamic.
And the trauma bonding that you just used there, just in case anybody doesn't know what the trauma bonding is pretty much what we talked about, the addiction that Sephora was mentioning.
Exactly. It's you're bonded with a trauma, it's not love. The person doesn't love you, otherwise they wouldn't hurt you. This is the message that we've been sending as well throughout our campaign, that control is not love. And that is how you continue being bonded. The person is controlling you. The person is controlling you, and they want to keep that control, so they give you something in return. And that return is an apology, another chance, an excuse, making you feel guilty. It's flowers, it's material items, material things, or giving you a day off from the kids so that you can relax. These kind of things, and that's it basically. Where you keep going back and back and back to that situation. But going back to the kids. I think, yes, the moment that you realize that this has having an impact on your children, or even maybe the children saying something, showing you, maybe in your situation they were not telling you, but you saw them, you were there crying and you couldn't move. So that's a very impactful moment, I think, for someone to.
This is not obviously exclusive to women who have children. I mean, in my case, it was when I had evidence, hard evidence. I'd always suspected that he was being unfaithful, but I had hard evidence ping up there a couple of days before Christmas. Okay, all right. Now I don't have an excuse. Now I have to. I can't ignore that.
Yes.
It's in black and white. He's not been faithful. And so that was the catalyst that said, okay, you've got to get out of this. But very much like your situation, and I'm going to ask for how you got out of this. In my instance, you sit there and you suddenly realize, and for any woman that's listening to this, you realize the enormity of the implications of your decision. your decision is going to change everything. And I think that's why a lot of women that I've spoken to take so long to come to that decision. But what did that decision then look like for you? You said in that moment, okay, this is the end of this. I am now making a choice. How did you had no money, you've got 3 kids, you're in a strange country. How did you get from that point to standing on a stage as Miss Malta at Miss Universe, for crying out loud?
That's when my other episode of domestic abuse, but mental abuse started, because I walked out from the relationship. Basically, he was already seeing someone, which I got to know when I arrived in Malta. So I randomly found out, after not me, my kids actually saw them, took a photo, and they were traumatized because they are little children. They don't understand, why is that kissing another woman in the street while you're married? Asking me this kind of questions. And I'm like, how can I put it? So it was going on already between them for over a year, because he came in Malta before me. And when I saw it, I was like, okay, for me, same. Like, anyway, it's been 1 year that I'm not physically intimate with him anymore. So, okay, fair enough. Maybe I saw it like he rather focus on that woman and I will have my peace. Maybe she will keep his attention. I will be here taking care of my children, and at least he will not hit me anymore or give me bad words. But yeah, that's the point I reached, to accept it, but stay there just to have my peace. I was okay with him going out with her. So that was the trauma for my children, already seeing him in the street with that lady asking me 1 million questions to which I wasn't able to answer. And in the meantime, I randomly met someone, and that person told me, listen, I'm single, separated, I have 2 children, and blah, 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 I like you. And I was like, you know what, let's see, because right now I'm not in the right state of mind to be dating, because I still have to deal with my problems at home. And that day, when I find myself almost paralyzed, I called the person and I asked him, can you come and take me to the doctor, to the police station, because I need to report, I need to go to the hospital, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And when I came back home, my clothes, underwear, shoes, everything on the street. Literally, I have everything lying daylight in the street. I went back to the police station to report. By the time I came back, everything packed, the luggage is in the living room, record sent to his lawyer, telling his lawyer that I packed my stuff because I want to leave my marital home. Turn it against me. I didn't have any lawyer because I couldn't afford paying a lawyer. So this person said, okay, well, since he's putting you out, you have nowhere to go. Take your children, take whatever you can. And the police came and asked me to leave because he was in a very complicated physical situation, a lot of drinks. Take your children, and if you have anywhere to go, just go. So that's how I ended up moving in with that person, which I didn't even know. I knew nothing about. Moving in that situation, he started paying my lawyer, showing me this life that he knew that it was something I needed at the moment. Switch the manipulation. You don't have to work. You stay home. Now we have 5 children, so you take care of everything. And I take care of the money. So I'm there, and then it started from, I don't want you to wear this. I don't want you to call. You call your mom, you stay 1 hour on the phone. You're using my time to spend with your mom on the phone. I don't want you to see any friends. You post a photo on social media, I want you to tag me. If a designer posts a photo of me on social media, he will come and tag himself. If I have to go to the hairdresser, he will come with me. I have to go to do my nails. He comes. So everywhere, like 24/7 together. So it was a different type of violence, manipulation, and everything. Not physically. Few times it happened that I've been assaulted by this person physically. So I switched. And at the same time, on the other side, my divorce was ongoing, and my ex, he was still there also, telling the court that I'm mentally insane. They took away my children from me. And this is when I experienced self-harm. I said, no, I can't take it anymore. They took the last thing that I have, my children, away from me. I can't see them. I'm not even allowed to go to their school because I went to the school and the school humiliates me in front of other parents, telling me that they receive a notification from my ex. I'm not allowed to take my kids or to see them. If they see me there anymore, they call the police, like in front of other parents. I was standing there crying and not even knowing what to do, humiliated. So I said, okay, that's it. I don't have a voice anymore. The only way I can call for help is to self-harm. And this is when I did it. And they took me to the hospital. I start all the psychiatric evaluation and everything. And yeah.
So how do we go? Because no, my heart is absolutely breaking right now, but I want to turn this around before we go into the other questions. And we have a lot of them, but how then did you come from that really horrific, dark place?
So I saw in total 4 different psychologists, and that ex used
And you
to,
were living where at this time?
I was living with that man.
Okay.
And he used to change me from a psychiatric to another, because whenever they try to open my eyes and explain to me things, he will notice at home that my attitude changed. I start to think straight. I start to have conversation with him and stand for myself, And he's like, no, she's not good for you. I think we should
Sorry,
change.
let me get this right. You went from a horrific, abusive situation with your husband to another situation with someone who had stepped in to basically to rescue you.
Yes.
And was applying a different kind of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
Good grief.
Yes.
Okay, so you're seeing the psychiatrist, the psychologist.
And he couldn't take it anymore because, I changed and I met the one I can say literally she saved my life. And I told him, listen, so he noticed at home that I was kind of not arguing, fighting, but giving my opinion, not being afraid anymore to speak from. I lost my voice. I'm afraid of screaming. I can't scream. I couldn't raise my voice. So he noticed the change. And at that moment, he said, no, you have to leave. End of our relationship. He broke up with me like that. Never gave me an excuse or an explanation. He just told me, we stopped the relationship. You have few months to find a job, to find an apartment and move out with your daughter. And that's it. And I was like, what? Yes, that was it. He kicked me out. I found a job. I found this little flat in St. Paul's Bay. The last time I saw him 5 years ago, he took my stuff 4 years ago, took my luggages, put under the building in the street and left, and I never saw him anymore. That was it. So I moved in that apartment. I found a job as a sales girl. I remember my salary was €800, my flat 750. Don't ask me how I managed to live with my daughter. She was supposed to go to school, and that year I couldn't pay her school. So everything just stopped from there. And I said, I'm not going to stop here because I need to stand for my daughter, at least her, because the 2 little ones, they have their dad. She have only me. She's already traumatized. And I was feeling so guilty, like terribly guilty for her. I said, she's going through all this trauma because of me, because of my wrong decision, because of my mistakes. She never asked to be here. So I need to do something to save the life of this little girl. I remember the first thing she told me when we moved into that small flat in St. Paul's Bay. When she moved in, she said, finally, this is our house, my house, and nobody will ever ask me to move out. And that day, literally, I'm going to cry. And that day, literally, this is when I realized how bad I can set my decision affected my daughter when she said that. And I promised to myself that I will never, ever, ever put my daughter or my children in such a situation. Never, ever. So I started looking for different jobs. I worked there for 2 months. I started looking for different jobs in iGaming because I knew that there I would get a better wage and I can live decently. Because till then, I didn't have any maintenance for my kids. I was functioning on me, no maintenance. I found a job, and I was so lucky. I found a job immediately. I changed, and COVID hit. I was working from home. Immediately, I found after 5 months working in this company as per Global, I moved in a different company as a live gaming presenter, working night and day. And I said, it's okay. I will do it. I know where I'm going right now. So I moved from my little flat to a big flat, empty. But I said, it's fine. I will sleep on the mattress. Next month, I buy a bed, I buy a couch, a carpet. And now my flat is I changed this house into a home, you know. And my daughter, she looks at me and I'm not ready to let her go. She's 20 now. And I said, you stay with me until you're 50. I don't want you out. This is your home. So, yeah. And I'm extremely, extremely proud of how strong I am. I don't know if it's proud of myself, but proud of my strength, I would say. Proud of my strength. And my daughter, her name is Faith, my eldest one. And I said, she's a gift from the universe. She's a present because she literally saved me. She's mature at a certain level that I don't even know if it's because she went through all the trauma that she's like that. But she's just extraordinary. Extraordinary.
I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. I'm quite choked up. But one thing that really struck me is just that whole story of resilience and the fact that at some point when you were self-harming, that everything was very, very, very black, a very dark place. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot to come out from a dark place. And it's not something you can do overnight. And it's not something that you can switch on a switch and suddenly it happens. You're going to slide back down. But as long as eventually you're still heading in the same directory and you're still heading northwards and you're still heading upwards, then at least you're still heading in the same direction, even if there are slips and falls in between. But you're here, you surviving all of this in this story, bearing in mind that you don't have your family. And you're in a foreign country, and I'm assuming a third country national, just as I have been here in Malta. We're foreigners. We've made this our home. We love this country. But even that adds an additional layer of challenge. But what I love about your story is there's a woman who's gone through every single adversity, every single shit that a woman can go through. And you stood on that stage a couple of weeks ago. And my heart is so full because I really want to share this. If anybody's listening to this show or watching this show and they're just thinking to themselves, I can't make it, I can't do that, I can't take that step, I can't get that far, I can't reach there. It isn't one big step. It's 100 small steps to get you to where you want to be. But by goodness, you can get there.
Yes.
And I think that's the hope that needs to be really taken away from your story, is that you can be so much more than you ever hoped for. You just have to keep on that same way.
That's what Miss Universe was about, basically. That's the impact. That's the message. It wasn't about the crown. It was beyond the crown. And my beyond the crown is my story. I couldn't have any other advocacy. My advocacy is my story. I can't tell the story of someone else. I can only tell my story, being authentic and inspire and empower others. That's why it was a huge challenge, because as I told you previously, my family didn't know exactly what happened. My ex lived in Malta. Malta is very small, and people talks a lot. They see us taking our children to different activities, so they know him. And, even him, he was afraid, not afraid, he was blaming me literally, like, you put me on the public face, you telling the story. And even this podcast, he would be like, why do you have to say that? But I cannot tell someone else's story to touch heart and to inspire others. You can only share your own story, your own
Exactly.
experience. And this is what I'm doing. I just want to be this light of hope in the life of people who experience the same thing that I've been through, and tell them, listen, if they ask me, how can I do it? I don't think I will do it. I'm just like, look at me. I'm sitting here. Not because I'm extraordinary. No, I'm the same human being as you. What you thinking now? What you feeling? I've been through it and I'm still feeling it, because it's something that will unfortunately stick to you for your life. You can't totally heal from your trauma, but you need to understand how to handle your emotions and how to live in a perfect harmony with your emotion. Embrace every imperfection, every emotion. You feel like crying, just cry. You feel like breaking stuff, just break it. You feel like, and then sit down and put yourself together and stand up. You know, I have a say, I love to say it, and I said it when I was in Mexico. It doesn't matter how many times you fail, or you fall.
Both.
It doesn't matter how many times you fall, but what matters is how long you take to stand. That's what matters. And you have a choice. Not choosing is also choosing. Are you going to stay there on the ground because you slept on some wine? Are you going to stay there? Okay, but for how long? Or are you going to take yourself together, put yourself together, and stand up and keep walking? The choice is yours.
Absolutely. Well, I want to put this in the context of other women in Malta, and I want to give other women hope, and I want to talk about the reality of the situation, and I want to keep asking you to jump in with your lived experience into this story. But I'm going to come to these two ladies, and we've just heard this incredible story, and everything starts with that first step. Everything starts with that first moment. You mentioned it yourself, Sam. You talked about that first step, that first stage, and whatever that needs to make that first step, there's that first step. Because there's the statistics that 1 in 4 women in Malta will in their lifetime experience intimate partner domestic violence. And there's over 250,000 women in Malta, and last year there were 2,071 cases of domestic violence reported. Now, we also had this Eurostat that came out and said that Malta has the highest instances of reported domestic abuse. And I have to say, I read that and I said to myself, oh my Lord, that's awful. That's awful. But that's why I'm calling it a double-edged sword, because it is awful, but it's also great that cases are being reported. I want to, first of all, whilst we break this down, because this is what we want women to step up, to stand up, to take inspiration from your story, to make change, to report and to see action in their lives so that we can all be as empowered. What are the barriers to women reporting? We've talked about it from an emotional point of view, but looking at it a little bit further into that, why are women not reporting? And why are women reporting? What is in our society right now that stops women from reporting? And how can we continue on this good news? Essentially, it's good news, is it not?
It is, because in the context, it's the report shows that 48.5 or 0.3% of victims of gender-based violence actually report. And there was quite the gap between Malta and other countries, and Malta scored the highest. And obviously, our work, what we want is for 100% of victims to be reporting. Actually, we want 0 victims.
Exactly.
And eliminating violence. But that when someone experiences gender-based violence and domestic violence, and going forward to the authorities, that is one crucial first step.
Yeah.
And it can be through social work services. It can also be through the police. It depends what you're looking for. Even the Victim Support Agency provides psychological support. So there are different avenues that one can use as a first step, even if they're not ready yet to report to the police, to proceed with the criminal courts in this sense. What encourages people to take that step. We were talking about the kids situation. I think reports did increase drastically this year, and I think one of the reasons, and not just this year, but femicide. When there's a femicide, there's a drastic increase in fear, and people realize that that could be them. So that is one of the things that actually encourages people
Tragically
to,
so.
Yeah.
Tragically so,
Yeah.
because it's more of a reactive sort of.
And let's face it,
Exactly.
we've had, what is it, 9 in the last five years? We've had
Yeah, I think
gender-based
yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as we said, 0 is the ideal.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we have these situations. It's how they're dealt with, and of course, again, prevention, protection, support, so that we do avoid having femicides. But we have to also say that, and again, femicide is horrible. It's the worst form of violence, and we do have to recognize that. And it's tragic when that happens, but it's also tragic when anyone experiences any form of violence. And there are so many people, women, who are experiencing domestic violence, which does not lead to femicide, and so many people and women getting support as well. And
Can I ask you, because I mean, it's something that's really bugged me, and I've been thinking about it, and I mentioned it before we sat down around this table. We think of violence against women, and this is why I asked the question right at the very beginning, what is it? We think of violence against women as women being hit. And now maybe we might start seeing it as financial, emotional, mental, sexual, or there's all of this. But I would never have thought of reporting my partner when he hit me, because I didn't think it was reportable. I didn't think
Exactly.
anybody would take that seriously.
Yes.
I had a black eye. I didn't have, scars or stitches or anything like that. I certainly wouldn't have reported the financial violence or the emotional abuse. So what is it that we can take steps against? Where is the line where it's not acceptable? Where do we say, okay, we might not need to report this, but we need to do something about it? And where do we say, no, actually, you know what, this is not acceptable. This has to be reported, because if I don't report it and I do manage to get out of this situation, it's going to happen to somebody else, or it might happen to me again. Where is the line?
In my my opinion, I might sound a bit extremist because of my story, obviously, and something that I will tell my children, my daughters. First slap, you leave. First physical abuse, you don't give a chance, you leave. Verbal abuses, you leave. You might want to have a conversation with the person because they are words, but if it's physical, you leave. Verbally, you might. Doesn't mean that you want. Now the decision is yours. But the boundary not to cross is the very first one. Physical, it's a good no-go for me.
I'm going to be more conservative. You leave with the verbal, with the psychological, with the emotional abuse before
there are
Or the physical.
The physical doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, there are so many other things happening as well. And the issue of control, because all these are controlling behaviors. The idea that you have, from a perpetrator's perspective, the fact that you control someone's life totally. I mean, whether it's demeaning them, whether it's verbally abusing them, gaslighting them, telling them that they're not, they have no way out, that they better not think of something else because there's no other life for them. I mean, these are all, and this does not happen. The behaviors are there. It's how to, and you cannot also, the idea that someone can just walk out very quickly. I mean, that is not the case, is it, in a lot of the cases? But certainly through education too. I mean, telling our girls what is not acceptable, certainly not acceptable. Telling our boys what is absolutely not, the zero tolerance
It's not
for that.
appropriate.
Exactly.
What is not appropriate? I mean, any form of physical violence is absolutely not acceptable. I mean, there's no line there. It's absolutely not acceptable.
And
And even psychologically,
yeah.
the coercive control.
Control.
It starts with the psychological, it doesn't start with the physical violence. Like what we were saying about the first dates. It's very unlikely that someone hits you physically
Of
on
course.
the first date, but showing signs of control, of manipulation.
I mean, you'd feel, I'm sure you'd
verbal, even
react
through
to-
jokes, for example,
Yeah.
And I think this is where we have to be utterly clear, because for the guests that were sitting at this table in the first domestic violence show, it was when they felt their children were threatened. For me, it was when I had evidence that my partner had been unfaithful. It wasn't the coercive control. It wasn't the financial control. It wasn't the abuse and the playing me down and putting me down. It wasn't the physical. It was that. That's where I had set my boundaries. That's where I had set my level. And for you, with all due respect, when you realize that there's a good chance you may never walk again, that's where you saw your boundaries.
Yes.
I mean, I think this is where we need to, where I'm seeing that we really need to be very clear that whereas Beatrice's boundaries are here, the Sephora, Rachel, theirs was there, mine was here. Actually, no, what you're saying is it's here. This is the baseline. You overstep the baseline of just being disrespectful.
Exactly.
And that is abuse.
Yes.
Exactly.
But you can't report that.
No, you can.
Okay,
But you
explain
take
to me
actions.
how.
No, you can.
You take your own actions. I mean, if someone feels comfortable to disrespect you, it means that he will feel comfortable to, and you accept it, it means he will feel comfortable to do many other things, because you just open, how you call it, you just open a little gap and he will make it bigger. So, in my situation, it started with a simple disrespect. It was the first night and it was nothing, and it ended up being worse.
When it comes to psychological abuse, there's so many forms as well. Even like we're using major umbrella terms, and one of the ways is, for example, stalking, harassment, and it creates a fear. So if you were in a relationship and you broke up, but he does not accept that you broke up for whatever reason, it could be there wasn't abuse before, you broke up for whatever reason, and then he's visiting your workplace, he's following you, he's liking every post and messaging you, and and creating this constant fear and this constant cycle of I'm watching you, for example. That's psychological abuse, that's harassment, and you can definitely report that. But it's even the verbal abuse. If another example, you're living in the same household, or you are in a relationship, and he's constantly demeaning you. Again, the manipulation, telling you you're not worth it, He doesn't have to hit you for it to be abuse. And you can definitely report that. In fact, around 70% of the police reports for this year were psychological
abuse. Exactly.
Okay, so if a woman has said, okay, she's listening to this show and she said to herself, I don't want my child to see this. I don't want this to be an example for my child, or whatever motivation. I don't want to be in this situation. I don't want to wake up tomorrow and live another day like this, and decides that she's going to take action. What does she do? Where does she go? You mentioned there's a number of services that she can. What does that reality look like? Because it's quite scary. I know, because I've stood in the similar shoes. It's quite scary when you know that that's a big decision and that you might have to face it by yourself.
It is a big decision. And to be honest, once you make the decision to leave, the risk increases.
Yes.
Okay? Because it's when the perpetrator, the aggressor, is feeling like they're losing control. So the risk increases. So what we do recommend is to assess your situation. taking that step, but assessing the situation and knowing the risk that you're in. I've mentioned the police. So recently, the Santa Lucia hub, the police force have introduced a gender-based violence and domestic violence unit, which is a specialized unit within the police, where you can go and do the reporting. Then they can liaise with the risk assessors as well. So it's another service from Agenzia Appoġġ, and you have your risk assessment done. Then depending on the risk, obviously the situation depends really on the risk, but they can take you also and liaise with shelter services. So that's if you really need protection from your perpetrator, and you can leave the home. That's one route, basically. It depends again on the risk of the situation, because the police can arrest the perpetrator immediately. That means that the court hearing would need to be done, the initial court hearing would need to be done within 48 hours from the arrest. So there's that process as well. But you can also go to the victim support agency I've mentioned earlier for psychological support. Again, there's a victim support unit of the police within the victim support agency, so they can guide you through the process as well, and they offer legal services in terms of information, providing information and guidance. And there's also Agenzia Appoġġ mainly. So Agenzia Appoġġ is the main social work agency. There's a domestic violence unit within Agenzia Appoġġ, and they offer support in terms of social work. So especially when there are other barriers like financial barriers, accommodation, the role of the social worker is very important there. So you can start at any different point, but abuse is a crime. So reporting that abuse and having the courage, because I understand that it takes a lot of courage to report someone that you love, who you think loves you back, who's possibly the father of your children, or if it's a parent doing the abuse on a child, or if it's a child doing the abuse on the parent, and you're not going to report your children, but abuse is a crime. And it's only in that way that we can break the cycle of violence as well, which is very important to break, because a perpetrator can rehabilitate themselves, and I'm not saying not, because everyone can change. It's not true that we say people won't change, and if it's the expression in Maltese, if you're born a square, you don't die a square.
A circle.
A circle. No, people can change. And if we work on ourselves as individuals, we can change and be better people. But it's a long process. And unless there is work being done on the individual, the cycle will continue. And that cycle can very easily start from a family where there is domestic abuse already. The child in that situation would be a victim, but they can very much grow up to be victims or perpetrators. So we have to break the cycle with victims. We have to break it as well with perpetrators.
Well, you recently said in an interview that we have a misogynistic and patriarchal culture. In a majority of domestic violence cases, the victim is a woman and the aggressor is a man. Because I'm coming back to what you just said right there. And Georgina, this one is for you. We're not saying that all men are aggressors. Of course we're not. But we must recognise that the manner in which we're brought up in our families, our schools, our different activities, and many different countries gives more power to men and boys. Now, this comes back to something that I wholeheartedly have been led to believe, and it comes back to what you said right from the very beginning. And I've seen this statement, and I mentioned it before. I've talked about it on the show before. There's a gentleman called Daniel Sloss, who is a comedian, and he talks about the fact that if we're going to make change, we as women are not enough. We need men to step up and make
Absolutely.
change. Because men standing by and not harming a woman does not mean that they are doing the right thing or doing enough. If they see another man, if they see a colleague, if they see a family member, if they see a friend speaking derogatorily, being disrespectful, whether it be physically, emotionally, financially, sexually, whatever, to a woman, they need to step up, out them, and shame them, and put them in the point where they know, that perpetrator knows that that's not okay. Because we as women have been saying this for millennia, and we're not being heard. There needs to be a fundamental cultural change where men get involved and men can take ownership of making change. Doing nothing is not enough. We have to empower and activate our men to get involved. How on earth do we do that?
Well, I think one other statistic from that Euro survey, I think, which was very telling, was that men and women have very different perceptions about the, the gravity of the problem. I believe there's around about 16% difference between, the amount of women who acknowledge that who perceive domestic abuse and gender-based violence as an issue, and intimate relationship violence. So whereas men don't seem to think that it's such a, it is that.
For sure they don't.
Well, but you have to ask why. I mean, why?
That's what
why
I'm
is there?
asking you.
Yes, but those are the questions we need to ask. Why is there such a gap, really, in perceiving, violence against women? This was about violence against women. So why is that? So certainly, the acculturation there, in how men. How men perceive this problem and how women are perceiving this problem is quite different. So how do we do that? I mean, of course, we have to educate, certainly, but it's more than just it's not just. I mean, if we look at these 16 days, I mean, this is where we stated, but. It requires more than that, and as I said, even cognitively, you do not change your habits simply because if you do not perceive it as a problem, if you do not change your perception. So it's how to change perceptions.
But okay, but here's the thing: if a man, we're using these gendered, and I'm not trying to bash men, but if a man saw a woman maybe being spoken to disrespectfully, and the woman was unknown to him, he would have one opinion. If it was his sister, if it was his wife, if it was his daughter,
well, you'd
there
hope
would
so.
definitely be a different opinion on
Yes.
that. No,
No,
90%
certainly.
guaranteed that you'd have a different opinion on that behaviour. And I think this is where we need to push forward, is that these statistics of 1 in 3/4 women are experiencing this, it means that it's someone it's someone that you care about, and it needs to be brought home. Can I ask you, Beatrice, when you're in those situations, were the people around you, his peers, did they not think that there was something wrong?
They knew. Everyone, like friends, not mine because I had none. My family, obviously not, but people around him, his friends, his family knew, but they used to blame me. It was my fault. He became like that because of me. Why? I don't know why, but they put the blame on me. His parents put the blame on me for so many years until recently. It was always my fault. It's because of me that he decided to stay in Africa. It's because of me that he started drinking. It's because of me that he became the way he is. It's me, it's me, it's me, it's me. And at the same time, they were comforting me. Oh, don't worry. You need to get married. When you have your first child together, he will change and blah, blah, blah. But they were just words. And, I was just kind of saying, okay, it's his mom. So she knows what she's talking about. I got married. I had my son and he almost killed me when I was pregnant. I had my daughter, which arrived accidentally, to be honest, because I didn't want anymore. But yeah. So no, I didn't get the support, not at all. On the contrary, I was the one to blame. I was the one to, yeah, they wished me so many bad things, so many, because I saw the messages and everything. I was the one who was responsible of everything, basically. And about reporting, because I think when it's come to domestic violence, when we talk about the actions that should be taken to protect the victim, how to take them, the first question is, are we taken seriously? In my situation, I can't report, I can't count how many times I've reported. First, in African society, which is totally different from European society, the mentalities there are different. I report, and I've been told in the police station with the evidences, they can see that I can't even hold the pen to sign. But they're telling me, he's your husband, and if we consider your report, we will go and arrest him and you will not see him anymore, and you find yourself alone in the street with your daughter. Is that what you want? And I'm a father, so go home and ask yourself the question to know what you're doing wrong. Like, okay. Or else I report, and then when they call him, he will go behind and bribe the officer, and that's it, done. So when we were in Malta, I said, okay, now we are in a different society with a different mindset. We are in Europe, there are human rights. And unfortunately, it went nowhere. It was the same situation. I went to report, and I'm just there standing, a Black woman. My English was, back then, it was horrible. So I was fighting to make myself understood, to explain the things in the concept. He's standing there drunk, threatening to fight with all the police station. However, my complaint will go nowhere. So I felt like I was left down by the society. I was rejected. I was abandoned. The evidence is I paid an amount of money that I didn't even have in Africa for my brother to be able to send me the evidence, the medical report, all the exam I did, all the report of the doctors, because I used to lie to the doctor. I told him, no, I had an accident. I closed the door and just slammed my fingers. He looks at me and he's like, I'm an adult, I know exactly what is going on. And I'm there crying. I can't deny, but I can't tell him you're right, But none of them was used. And at the end, the cherries on the cake, they said I'm mentally insane and took away my children from me because I'm not able to take care of them. I mean, when you have this kind of behavior toward the victims, what did you expect? What did you expect from them? Because you're taking away everything. They came to you to ask for help because you're the only hope they have, and you make them feel this way. What do you expect? They will for sure harm themselves, which was my case.
Sam, I saw you nodding during that. I mean, things have changed.
They have. Obviously, I'm not going to discount anyone's first-hand experiences because it's their experience, and I wasn't there. So and we do hear these stories, but again, I always try to advocate to prevent these horror stories, let's call them that, from silencing women and victims of gender-based violence and domestic violence from reporting. It's important that we say these stories. They're really, really, really important. But I live with hope. I'm a person who lives with hope, and I do think that going forward and reporting is the only way that when we don't get it right, and I say this with full responsibility as Commission, as the people who are coordinating the implementation of the convention that we are obligated to implement, you know. And when we don't get it right, we should be held accountable, you know. And I think that's the only way to do that is by preventing victims from staying home and not reporting, because staying at home and not reporting, I mean, the situation won't get better, the situation will get worse. So taking that first step, taking that action, I mean, we do work tirelessly to try to get it right, you know. But if we don't, hold us accountable.
I love this because we've had a lot of heartbreaking stories here on the table. We've had a lot of heartbreaking discussions and a lot of sadness today because the situation of any woman going through this is tragic. But I have heard you say this today several times. Hold us accountable. We want change. We will keep working to change. And we'll keep doing what needs to be done. And I'm going to, in a few seconds, we'll be closing, and I'm going to ask you for your final thoughts in a moment, Sam. But when it comes to that idea of change, you are pushing for this to be more prominent, to be taken seriously.
I mean, it's the second highest crime in the country. And
That I didn't
we
know.
cannot not take it seriously. So, I mean, yes, I've been passionate about this from a young age. And I will continue doing our best, you know, and investing and strengthening the Commission and strengthening our relationships with different entities, doing more awareness raising campaigns. You know, it's the way forward for us. But, and here I'm going to talk about the campaign because we cannot do it alone. And that's what the message is together we stand, together we heal. And we need to heal as a society, and we need to stand together, you know. If it's just me, and if it's just a few people, you know, in organizations and a few people here and there working on this, and a few people in entities working on this and pushing for this, then our time will pass and you know, we'll move on, and people will replace us eventually. So it's really a collective effort that we need. And you've mentioned the engagement of men.
Yes.
And we do need more men to talk about this, because not all men are perpetrators. God forbid that all men are perpetrators. The majority of men are not. The majority of men do care about their loved ones as well. So when we're saying it's 1 in 4 women who experience gender-based violence, and we're saying we probably know someone who experienced gender-based violence, but it's also the men who know someone who experienced gender-based violence, you know, and they do care about their loved ones and they do want to challenge, you know. But I mean, I can start a whole other conversation, but the patriarchy affects men as well. And that is also how men are expected to behave, even in these situations. And that's what we need to continue challenging. It's the patriarchy.
Absolutely. And it's worth saying, I think it's really worth saying that as much as it sounds as if we're sort of saying, oh, men, you know, they're the problem. That's not the case at all. No. Men, in my mind, are actually key to the solution.
Yeah.
Are actually more important in this discussion than most components, because men are the ones that can see change and make change happen, because they are the ones that can speak to their colleagues, their family members, their friends, and call them out. We can't do that. Men have the power in that respect. If I'm coming to you because I'm seeing a smile, but men have the power to change men.
Well, they do. Their fathers, their brothers, their friends, you know, they're with their colleagues. So, you know, you're very right there. But it's also a culture. Women also have to do their parts. I mean, as a
Yeah.
society. I mean, we mother boys. I mean, it you know. So this is the transmission of values. Isn't just even in terms of patriarchy. Patriarchy remains strong somehow, not because it is just the men that are. There's somehow the whole of society colludes. So those are interesting questions that need to be asked, and how we change culture, how we ask the questions, and hence why I think the slogan, very much so asks for that. This idea that we come together, that we stand together, that we heal together. So I would certainly want men to be part of this.
Absolutely. And it's empowering men that they have a role to play. I'm actually going to do something different. I long threw away my script. Forget it. But I'm going to close by asking you 3 different questions. I'm going to start with you, Georgina.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to conclude. How do we change society? How do we heal society in terms of domestic violence? What do you see from your viewpoint that we can do to change this situation?
We certainly have to talk more about it.
Okay.
We have to acknowledge that we do have a problem. I mean, it's fine, saying that, somewhere someone has a problem. It's always, the distance makes it, somewhere on the fringe, somewhere that does not quite, if we look at the statistic, actually, certainly within our circle of acquaintances, friends, etc., we will know there is someone. So we can't quite ignore it. So that certainly is owing up that, our society needs to tackle this. I think, yes, we see the effort and we see the institutions being strengthened, etc., which is great. But it's how we get society on board, because unless we acknowledge it as a society and we put our thoughts to good use and take action, because it's about an action-based approach. How do we change? I mean, we have to go to the communities. We have to go to, it's one thing me hearing something on the radio or on TV and me, or on YouTube, etc., and me relating to that. It's how we make it more relatable, and for people to understand that this is absolutely crucial, that we acknowledge it and we teach our children. We make sure that our girls are what's the word? That our girls become informed, that our boys are informed. And also that the idea of teaching respect, what respect is, between couples, what love is, because these are, these notions are there. I mean, children, young people are bombarded with all these, expectations also of what is happiness, what is love, what is this, what is that, but also what is absolutely not acceptable. I think perhaps that is the way I would want it to go forward.
I love that you said that, because you're looking at this from a cultural viewpoint. You're looking at we need to educate, we need to change, we need to talk, which is exactly why we're doing what we're doing here at this table, and exactly why we're having this campaign, because we need to put it on the agenda to be part of conversation. And by doing that, we need to be able to define exactly what you just said there, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and to bring that level right down from where most of us would say, okay, well, that's, being hit, giving a punch, that's not acceptable. No. This is the level. Mm-hmm. This is where we start. And that conversation needs to be on a social and society level, but also part of discussions in the home, discussions with peers. Sam, for you, how do we make this change for women? How do we make this is a women-related issue on this table? I'm going to say it once again, we know this affects men. Men also go through issues of gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, but right here on the table. So how are we going to make change for women? What are we doing for women? What can a woman do?
Well, first of all, we have to continue working on gender equality and or addressing gender inequalities at different levels, because gender discrimination, so violence against women, is an issue of gender imbalance, gender discrimination. It's one of the worst forms of. So starting with playing with the dolls, being engaged in sport, these differences, the stereotypes that we started mentioning in the beginning of what a woman should be and what a man should be. For me, we're all human beings and we should all be free into being who we want to be and developing our potential to the full. And what violence against women is a violation of that human right, of that liberty and freedom. So, I mean, I'm going to be a commissioner now more than anything. We do have a 5-year plan. We launched the strategy last year, and at the moment we are focused on implementing that strategy. The strategy that I've mentioned earlier focuses on prevention, protection, and support, prosecution as well, because accountability, again, I'm referring to this maybe big word, but accountability is very important. And prevention, I would say, is even more important than anything in that strategy, because if we prevent violence, then we're going to need less resources for, we're going to have less victims, less people to prosecute, and we definitely have to prevent that, so that maybe one day we will actually manage to eliminate this issue once and for all.
I love the fact you took a big intake and outtake of breath at the end of that, because I'm not asking you to go through the strategy. I'm not asking you to go through all of it, because I'm fairly sure that it would be 5 shows. But
I can do that, 5 shows.
But I'm really encouraged to know that you are a passionate woman who has seen this, has experienced this, you understand this, and you are making change. Whether or not Eurostats are coming out that look great and rosy, or whether they look just a tiny bit crap right now, there is action that's being taken. Yeah. And I know that I know in the last couple of years that the situation that relates to reporting is not necessarily Beatrice's experience. And that means I'm coming to you, Beatrice, for the final word. I'm going to cry, I'm sorry, because no. you've just... Honestly, I keep coming back to it, that word of encouragement is that if you could have been in that place that is so dark and so desolate and so desperate, and you've risen from there, and let's face it, without a massive amount of support, without family members, without friends around you, you've really gone for it. I really feel that that's an inspirational story, that if there is all of this support that we can tap into as well, that women can get out of this situation that they find themselves in, whether it be more drastic as yours, or whether it just be the red flags that you see on the first date, and knowing that that's not the way to go. So I'm going to ask you to really close this show and inspire women, whatever situation they find themselves in, how to identify and how to take action.
How to identify, it's never ignore the red flags. First of all, always face every situation in life with your mind wide open, because it's very sad to say that today. Unfortunately, nowadays, with everything happening and how we as human, we became so selfish, on a selfish way, thinking about ourselves and not considering for 1 second how our actions, our words could actually impact the person in front of us. So we need to build our protection by always remaining wide open. Do not sleep on whatever situation you have in front of you, such as love, for example, which is a beautiful thing. You work in a relationship, no matter how beautiful it is, please stay with your eyes open and do not ignore the first red flags and run away, like we said, save your life. So, yeah. and how to overcome once you're into it. I mean, thanks to you and what you're doing, because sometimes we tend to believe that we are alone. My story is not the story of everyone. What I've experienced with the society, how I felt, thank God things have changed today. And I'm very, very happy for it that things are moving on. Things have changed. I'm telling my story today to show from where I came from compared to what is done today. So never think that you're alone, because you're not alone. Reach out for help. It's very important, because that help, you will receive it. Even to me, I mean, I'll be more than happy to help or guide anyone coming to me with her issues and everything. Yes, but I have a beautiful say that I always said. It's a quote that I always said at the end of my interview. It's, nobody has enough water to extinguish the flame that burns within you, and even if they manage to extinguish that flame, raise from your ash and pry with 1,000 light like a phoenix. That says it all.
What a beautiful way to finish the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
That was a hard show.